There she is.
All right, thank y'all for being patient with us. I'm sorry about that. We'll get back on track here a little bit. Obviously, we're a little bit off schedule, but we will start with Ms. Ballard and the Governor's Office of Children and Families.
Thank you, Chairman and committee members, for allowing me to be here to present the Governor's 2013 budget recommendations. I have read over his recommendations for 2013 and happy to comply with all of those recommendations in there. Just to give you all a brief reminder of the type of programs we do prevention and family support, which is child abuse, neglect, and home visiting, juvenile justice, which is funding for the juvenile courts and diversion programming and prevention, youth development, where we have programming for commercially sexually exploited children, and abstinence education, and family violence, where the domestic violence shelters and sexual assault centers. I'd like to start with line item on page 65, 1985. I'm in the House budget research. I have the wrong sheet. I retrieved this offline. I wasn't sent.
We'll give you a minute to look at this one, and we'll
Okay, great.
make it
Thank
work
you.
out.
No, this is. Okay, the line item I was referring to in your tracking document is 26.5.8. This is the recommended cut for the community strategy grants. We currently give out 10 grants that are up for continuation, and for 2013 we'll give out 9 grants. It was also recommended the $1.8 million for community-based grants as well for our system of care grants. Did you have any questions?
Are there any questions? Right. We've got you on.
Thank you, Ms. Ballard. I know that Commissioner Reese wants to be a part of this discussion, and I'll ask him to follow up with you, but I'm interested in what is the best way for us to analyze preventable child deaths in Georgia. We have a child fatality review commission. I did the legislation a long time ago that is now in the Office of Child Advocate, I think. And we have a separate maternal health death investigation in the Department of Public Health. And I am guessing that there is, based on the CDC mortality, that there are resources out there, not only money but expertise, that can really do an analysis of whether or not our preventable child deaths at the hands of adults are going up, going down, or about the same as they have been. I've talked to some statisticians that have got a variety of different views on that, and I don't think I understand it, and I'm confident that the AJC doesn't have the resources either to do a real analysis as to what's the true information. Have you ever looked at your federal funding sources or your grant options to assist as an independent review of what we should be doing to analyze preventable child deaths?
We do receive the CBCAP grant, which is the community-based child abuse prevention grant, which I do believe that some of our funding could be used towards that, as well as our Children's Trust Fund. We have $1.4 million left in that, which a portion of those funds I feel like would fit perfectly with the child fatality review.
I wanted to raise that, and Commissioner Reese can offer an opinion, whatever he'd like to later, but I don't believe that the Commission on Child Fatality Office, which is budget is down to 80, I think it's one employee and $80,000, something like that, is really able to do this in the way that we might want to think about doing it in a comprehensive way. I'm wondering where that duty should be since we have it scattered right now. So I'd like you to think about that as a possible federal funding source on mortality issues.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Are you referring to?
I have the tracking sheet now.
Well, let me go back then. What I got out of what you first said was that you had 10 grants, community-based grants.
Yes.
You're cutting those to 9. So which one are you cutting?
Well, they're up for continuation right now. They have to reapply every year. And so we just released the RFPs. They're in the middle of applying. So we'll see based on the applications and past performance.
So when will you award those? And are they in various amounts?
They are in various amounts.
And are they 1 year only? Because the line above it is this is the final year for community-based grants. They're not the same?
Our community strategy grants are different from our system of care grants, which is the community-based grants referred to above.
Can you give me a list of those two?
Yes.
And the amounts?
Yes.
And the duration?
And
How many years it is?
yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Any other questions? Thank you so much.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you for being here today. Okay, before we move into DCH, if we may, just very quickly, I believe the Council on Aging asked for just a few minutes to speak. Is that right? Yes. Just very quickly, because we're running a little behind, and the commissioner has to be out of here by 4. So. Thank you.
We won't go back over what the council is because you know that. It is an attached agency, and you usually hear us asking for aging services money, but this is again what we talked with you about for the fiscal year 12 amended budget. The small 2% cut, the governor did not recommend restoration of that. It's a tiny bit of money in your big budget, but critical to our being able to reimburse our council members who volunteer their time. All we do is reimburse them for their actual expenses when they come to meetings, when they come down to the Capitol. And so we need that $3,000+ and hope that you would be able to do the same in the FY13 budget that you did in the 12 amended with replacing it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Are there
you.
any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Reese.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity to come present our fiscal year 13 governor's recommended budget for the Department of Human Services. I'm going to go through in whatever detail you would like those programs that are 0 state dollars and 100% federal dollars. I will pretty much run through them very quickly unless you want any more information. So let me start with on the tracking document. I hope I have the one that you have is item 27, section 27, item 27.1. This is adoption services. So of course, adoption services are the permanent placement of children, providing financial support and resources for special needs children that are adopted. We start off with a base of a little over $34 million. And then I'm going to outline in this program some adjustments that you're going to see consistently throughout our programs that are included We have an increase to reflect the adjustment in the employer share of the state health benefit plan. We have an increase to reflect an adjustment in the employer share of the employee's retirement system. We have an adjustment in the workers' compensation premium. We have an adjustment in unemployment insurance premium. We have an increase for general insurance liability. And we have a reduction in funds for the State Personnel Administration assessment for positions. It went from $137 to $73 per position. So as I go through and you hear me talk about statewide adjustments, those are the items that we're referring to. So with regard to this budget, I'll point out that you've heard me talk in fiscal year 12 about money was put in to address possible penalties for the Title IV-E audit. There's no monies in 13 for that. So we end up here with a recommended budget of 34.2. After school care, these are funds for community-based activities for youth throughout the state, after school, out of school, summer programs, et cetera. This is a zero state dollar program. Now, as I go through here in the budget that we had originally, we have included, or it is included, the 5 components of the Vocational Rehabilitation Services. But of course, the governor has amended that proposal now, and that those services are to be an attached agency, not a division within the Department of Human Services. So I can answer questions about that. Essentially, an attached agency is an entity that has its own independent policymaking and rulemaking authority, and to the extent they need or desire, the agency to which they are attached can provide administrative support. In my experience, it has been everything from contractual support, running their budget through the larger budget, providing staffing. It depends on the particular entity, how small, how large they are, and what their capabilities are. So that is the governor's proposal now. So they're not really essentially going to be a part or proposed to be a part of human services per se. So I'll just gloss over those as I go through unless you have questions about them. Moving down to Childcare Licensing, this is the Office of Residential Child Care. They license, inspect, and monitor out-of-home residential care. The only state dollars here are a little over $1 million to reflect the replacement of TANF funds with some state funds to maximize Title IV-E funding. So there's only a little over $1 million in state funds in childcare licensing. Next, we go down to Childcare Services. This starts out with a budget of $54.2 million, and we end up with zero. The reason we end up with zero is the governor has made a decision to move the child care subsidy program, its administration, to the Department of Early Care and Learning. This was initiated originally when the state applied for the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grant for DECAL. We did not get that grant as a state, but the decision was made to go ahead and move this program with the rationale being that we would consolidate services throughout state government for children 0 to age 5 in the Department of Early Care and Learning. Now, I'll note that the eligibility determinations for the child care subsidy will remain with the Department of Human Services and continue to be done in the DFACS offices around the state. But the administration of the program itself and that budget is slated to be transferred through this budget to DECAL July 1, 2012. Next, we go to Child Support Services. We start out here with the base of 25.1. We have some of the adjustments that I spoke about, including an increase for telecommunication expenses. Then there's an actual cut here of 1.5 for 13. And child support will replace or fill in with that cut with incentive funds that they receive from the federal government based on the performance of the child support division. And the child support division, based on its excellent performance in the last few years, has incentive funds to replace this state fund cut. So we end up with a base or a recommendation of $24.6 million. Child welfare services, these are our frontline workers who protect children and families. We start out here with 89.7. We end up at 91.4. There are no cuts in this program. Of course, we need all the staff and all the money we can have for this budget to do the job we need to do in this area. Next, you have child welfare services. This is a special project carved out $250,000, 100% TANF money. This is a contract with child advocacy centers to work with children who have been the subject of sexual abuse. Next, we go to community services. These are funds to alleviate the causes and conditions of poverty in communities across the state. This is a $0 state dollar program, 100% federal. Next, we have Departmental Administration. This includes our budget, accounting, financial, strategic planning, some travel, fraud investigations, our EBT card processing, our success mailing for food stamps, and also legal support. We have a base here of 34.6. We have a cut of 668,757, and we end up with 38,938. You'll see here on 27.10.11 a reference to transfer of Rehabilitation Administration, that 1.4, depending on how the proposal with regard to administrative attachment of vocational rehabilitation turns out. That probably would not be there. Then we'll have we got an enhancement for EBT growth, the tremendous volume in food stamp growth that we've seen. We got an enhancement to process those EBT cards and payments. And so you'll see we end up with $38.9 million. The next category is disability adjudication section. That also is one of the components, the programs within the vocational rehabilitation, and subject to the same analysis with regard to attachment. Next, we have elder abuse investigations and prevention. This is our adult protective services, our programs that protect seniors from abuse, neglect, and exploitation. We start here with $12.2 million. If you go down to line 0.8, you'll see there provide state funds to replace the loss of civil monetary penalty funds. What that refers to is the federal government enacted a rule that went into effect the 1st of January of this year to disallow the use of these funds for long-term care ombudsman, about $1 million, and for adult protective services, about $611,000, which totals about 1.6. The interpretation now is that these funds, these civil monetary penalties, which are proceeds from fines levied against long-term care facilities for abuse of residents or some violation, that these monies can only be used to benefit residents of those facilities, which are primarily nursing homes. So we'll no longer be allowed to use them in these two areas, and so we got an enhancement to address that issue, and we end up here with a proposal of $14.2 million. Next is elderly community living services. These are services that support seniors and caregivers to enable them to stay at home in their communities. The figure there that you have at the beginning, 71.4, that includes a little over $5 million in tobacco funds. The other state funds are around $66.4 million. We have our statewide adjustments. We have a increase here to reflect a reduction in the FMAP rate. This is the amount that the federal government participates with regard to Medicaid, and we end up here with $71.786 million. Elder support services, 27.14. These are funds used to support employment for seniors, to help them understand their Medicare rights, to provide meals. This is where the Meals on Wheels program funding is, and also community resource information for the elderly and the aging. We start here with $2.847 million. 1.117 of that is 1.729, I'm sorry, of that is tobacco funds. And we have our statewide adjustments, and we end here with a recommendation of $2.8 million. Next is energy assistance. This is a 100% federally funded program, financial assistance for low-income citizens to meet their home energy needs. This is 100% federal. Next is family violence services. These are services to provide safe shelter to victims of sexual or domestic violence. These are the funds that for the last 2 years and continuing into fiscal year 13 that we will contract with the Governor's Office of Children and Families, who you just heard from, to administer these funds and these programs. You'll see here that we had an amount here, about 9.8 added in to reflect the loss of TANF supplemental funds. You've probably heard me talk about the fact that we are going to lose, or we're anticipating or almost assured of losing $37 million in the TANF supplemental grant. This is one of the areas where it was most affected, so we've put in state dollars here to address that, and that's why you end up with a much higher figure for fiscal year 13 here of 11.5 million. Next is federal and unobligated balances. These are just all federal funds, TANF carryover money from year to year is estimated by the Office of Planning and Budget, and there you have a little over $8 million, 8.7 in federal funds. Next is our eligibility benefit services. These are our frontline staff and all the DFACS offices around the state who help us determine eligibility for Medicaid, for TANF, for food stamps, and child care. We have the caseloads per worker for this work is over 750. So we start out here with 99.9 million. We have our statewide adjustments, and we have a balance here of 104,423,000. No cuts in this program. We really need no cuts proposed. We really need this money to continue the work that's out there with the recession, the tremendous increase in the volume of food stamp applications has stretched the staff thin, and they're doing a good job for us keeping up. Next, 27.19 federal fund transfers to other agencies. This is a 100% federally funded category of over $100 million that these funds are appropriated to the Department of Human Services, but then we send them out to other state agencies. This is probably the area where we were most impacted excuse me, by the loss of the TANF supplemental funds. So you'll see here on the right that there's over $15 million cut here because of the loss of that $37 million. It's about $8.9 million from the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities, and about $6.3 million from Public Health. So we end up here around 86.5, but this is 100% federal, as I mentioned. Next, you'll see Georgia Industries for the Blind. This is also part of the Vocational Rehabilitation Services, and that recommendation has changed from coming to DHS to being an attached independent agency. We move over to 27.21. This is out-of-home care. This is where we promote and arrange stable placement in relative or family settings for over 24-hour placements for children. And we start here with 59.577 million. You'll see the statewide adjustments, and we have a utilization increase here on 27.213. 214 of a little over about 3.8 million. So we end up here with the recommendation of a little over 68 million. We've seen an increase in the utilization of out-of-home care. We think that that will stabilize and reach an equilibrium over time, but we did get funds put in to address the increase we've seen since the start of fiscal year 12. Next is Refugee Assistance. This is 100% federally funded program to help resettle, provide cash assistance to refugees for a time-limited period who come to Georgia. There's 0 state dollars here and about 8.7 million federal. Next is Roosevelt Warm Springs Institute. This is also a part of the Voc Rehab Services, and the same analysis applies. Next, we have Support for Needy Families, Basic Assistance. This is a time-limited cash assistance program to help promote self-sufficiency for individuals and families. There are only 100,000 state dollars. This is pretty much 100% federally funded. That 100,000 state dollars is to help support 35 two-parent families who are a part of TANF benefits. Next, we have Support for Needy Families Work Assistance. This is cash assistance to help families stay in the workforce. It can be in the form of assistance with travel or assistance with child care to enable parents to be able to stay in the workforce and continue to work. This is 0 state dollars and about 21.7 million federal dollars. Next is Vocational Rehabilitation. This is the big component of the Voc Rehab Services, and the same analysis applies. You've heard from the Council on Aging about they are an attached agency, and if you've heard from them about their request and their funding. Finally, we have the Family Connections Program. This is attached administratively to Human Services. They have a starting budget of around 7.9 million. They proposed about looks like around $150,000 in cuts for various contracts, including their county collaborative contracts. And that 139,920 you see on 2728.2, that comes out to around $880 per county contract. And so their proposal comes out to a recommended little over $9 million for fiscal year 13. So that's our proposed fiscal year 13 budget. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have about that, or I know you've got some other topics you want to talk about as well.
Do we have any questions? Let me start down here first of all with Representative Henson, please.
Thank you for your presentation here. I do have a few questions. Currently, how many children are available for adoption in the state of Georgia?
I don't know the answer to that question. Ron, do you know? How many children?
Approximately how many children are available for adoption?
We can get that information for you. I want to say it's usually about 300 or something, but we can get the data, we can get that. There are about 7,000 in the system that you can find the process. But we'll look into that for you.
A lot of them going from foster care home to foster care home because, you know, I'm just saying, I seem to watch TV on Sunday evening when they have Channel 5 does, I forgot what they call their program. And the thing I hear repeatedly every single week is they want a permanent family, they want to stay with someone, they want to belong. And it's like they're going from place to place to place. How much effort, are we changing the way we're doing it? Are we increasing our efforts? What are we doing to ensure that we can find permanent homes for these children?
That's a great question. We just recently put a new person in charge of our adoption unit.
We can
moving.
You can pull that microphone up.
What's your number?
Press the button on the
Try that one.
microphone.
Press that little red button on the panel in front of you.
Oh,
You can
on
come up
the
here, Ron,
desk.
if you want. You come up here.
I usually talk loud. I was there a second. I'm sorry. Adoption is certainly an issue that under our new administration here, we're looking to put more energy into, because you're absolutely right. There are plenty of children that are needing permanent homes, and it's an area that, quite frankly, I think we maybe have not put enough attention to, as we put a lot more attention to the foster care situation. So we just recently moved a new person into our adoption unit. We're looking to totally revamp our adoption unit, and we're trying to put the resources needed to do just what you're talking about, find the permanent homes that are needed for these children, because right now there's a lot of kids that we need to find those homes for.
I think so, if you've got at least 7,000 in the system. Follow-up question or two, not on that issue. Is the Department of Early Care and Learning, 27.5.1, we're transferring that, is that in education?
No, this is the Childcare Services subsidy. So these are families who need assistance with the tuition or the payment for daycare or after-school services, and this is an amount of money appropriated for that purpose. There's $54 million state and $225 federal, and so this will be the transfer of that child care subsidy to Early Care and Learning, who would administer the program, but the eligibility determinations to determine if a family with children who wanted to, they choose their providers through those licensed through DECAL. The eligibility will remain with Human Services, but the administration of that program will go to DECAL, with the thought and the rationale being that it's best to, as much as possible, unify services, particularly to those 0 to age 5, in one state agency.
But I guess my question is that a standalone department, or is it attached to education?
Yes, the Department of Early Care and Learning is a standalone executive branch agency.
Okay, thank you. And then my other thing is, you know, part of the problems we had at one time prior to your becoming the commissioner was that Department of Human Services was too large. So we took different departments away, we made some of them stand alone and all of that, and we made it a more manageable department. And now we're taking 6 or 7 agencies out of Department of Labor and adding them to Department of Human Services. how many people are we adding? Are we making your department as large as it once was, which was almost unmanageable? Yeah, that was sort of a question thing.
Mhm.
Are we giving you back the same size you had previously?
Well, let me answer that in two ways. First, no, the Department of Human Resources at its apex, I think, was around or over 20,000 employees. Now, through the mechanisms you've mentioned, we're down to 8,500. So those primary programs are DFACS, Child Support Services, Division of Aging, and the Office of Residential Child Care. In the original government proposal, the entire vocational rehab program would have come and become a fifth program or division within the Department of Human Services, which would have added approximately 2,000 employees and put us at around 10,500, which would still have been substantially less than DHR was at its largest. The thought was that there are synergies that could be achieved by putting those programs with many of the employment-related activities that we have in human services. But as I said, the governor has amended that proposal. The proposal now is to make the Vocational Rehabilitation Services an attached agency. They would be independent. They would have their own board. They would have their own executive director. And they would just use Department of Human Services for any administrative or infrastructure assistance that they required, which is yet to be determined. So the original proposal is not what it was, and so I think if you had that concern, it's been mitigated by the amendment.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, could you tell me again about how many employees right now? I lost you there for just a
Right
minute.
now, within the Department of Human Services, approximately 8,500, which are scattered, of course, throughout the state. There are, I would say, and don't hold me to the exact number, but around 6,500 for DFACS, and then the other 2,000 through our other programs, including the administrative functions here in Atlanta.
Thank you. Okay, who is next? Representative Hurd.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I want to kind of follow up on the same question that Representative Henson had, and that was in reference to, as I understand it now, these 2,000 employees and 40,000 VR clients will be an attached agency.
That's the proposal, yes, sir.
What's going to be the administrative cost of this? You're talking about now hiring an executive director, correct? Is that what
That's
the
what the bill
proposal
says,
is?
yes. Yes.
And I guess, why can't it be an attached agency where it is? And we would cut costs, it would be less government. To me, we're adding more government right here. If you hired more people at a time when the state really doesn't have the money.
Well, I think both with the original proposal and the amended proposal, there's really no contemplation of hiring additional people. The original proposal was to take the program and the employees as they exist currently and to move the administration of those programs to an executive branch agency. The attached agency does not change that focus. If there was going to be additional staff, it may be that one executive director, or it could be that that person is already a part of the program and would not be a net increase in compensation costs for the state. That's yet to be determined. But the increase in personnel was not contemplated in either proposal.
Kind of follow up to that, but I'm still trying to get my mind wrapped around the activities of helping people get jobs, and really that was one of the reasons why it was combined with the Labor Department. We need people to go to work. Just because people may have physical challenges, and that could be any of us out here. You could be a stroke away, heart attack away from needing these services.
Yes, sir.
And to me, it's a very specialized area. This is just not like any other agency that we have. When you're looking at people that go through this agency, they have specialized needs, specialized services, and I guess we always have said previously, if it's not broke, why are we trying to fix it, you know? That's my major concern right now.
Well, I would say that we thought that when we were looking at bringing it to the Department of Human Services, that there were clear synergies that existed between the work that's done within that program and a lot of the work that's done in human services with regard to employment. And I'm talking about a proposal that's not existing anymore, but just to give some context to your question, we do a lot of work in DHS within DFACS, both with regard to TANF and with regard to foster children, in providing training and education and skills to be able to go to work. We do the same thing in aging with regard to helping elderly people get and or keep employment so that they can stay in their homes and in the community. Within the child support area, we do an awful lot of work to help non-custodial parents become employed or get the skills they needed to become employed so that they can fulfill their child support obligations to their children and to the custodial parents. So we thought there were synergies, and another thing I'd say is that regardless of whether it's a part of DHS or now an attached agency, the specialized skills and knowledge and competencies of those personnel would not be affected by any transition because those people would still be doing the same work for the same clients.
Rehab Services right now does not have any administrative personnel. They don't have any finance staff. It's no HR staff, no payroll personnel. Where are these people going to come from?
Well, that's the concept of being attached, that you get those services from the attached agency. So if a proposal continues to fruition, then the Department of Human Services would try to provide that assistance that they might not have. That's what we do for other attached agencies, and that's the concept that's consistent throughout state government.
Okay. And you don't anticipate any costs additional other than an executive director?
Well, I'm not sure that I'm the one to comment on that, but that's my thought as I stand here, that if you take those employees and you move them and they become attached, that you're not talking about additional staff. Those are the people already there doing the work, and it's quite possible that executive director could come from within that current staff, but if it's one person, it might be one person. And then there's the administrative functions that we may be asked to provide within DHS.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
Thank you.
Chairman Manning.
With the loss of the $37 million in TANF funds, can you kind of lead me through where we're going to get the money to backfill that, or take? And I know it's probably, you know, there's no just one place, but I'm just thinking that TANF money is gone.
Yes.
And
well, we think it's gone. We've been told that it will be, but there's actually no federal budget that reflects that officially yet. But we've been asked to plan as if it were not, and both fiscal year 12 amended and 13 reflect that plan. And you'll see it primarily scattered throughout our programs, but I think it's primarily, you'll see the biggest impact in three areas. If you'll go to, it would be, let's see, 27.16, Family Violence Services. OPB and the governor came up on 27.16.2 with about $9.8 million in state funds to replace the loss of TANF funds to fund those programs that we work with them on a contractual basis to pass those through to Governor's Office of Children and Families. And then on 27.19, the federal funds transfers to other agencies. That $101 million of federal money, there's about 15.2 that is reflective of that reduction in the TANF supplemental, and those are funds that we pass through to other state agencies, and it's going to primarily affect Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities for fiscal year 13 to the tune of around $8.9 million, and Public Health to the tune of around 6.3. So there's no question that that's a cut that hurts. It's not one that we would want to make, but we had to try to find a way to address the reduction. It's scattered in smaller amounts throughout some other programs, but those are the primary areas where the biggest impact will be felt.
Chair, can I get one more?
Yes.
And I think maybe I misunderstood what you said, but I think you said in your DFACS offices that your case workers are now having about 750
Now,
cases?
in our eligibility, the piece of DFACS that handles eligibility for Medicaid, TANF, food stamps, and child care, all those services where you go into a DFACS office in any of 159 counties to apply, unless you apply online through our Compass system. The average caseload for those eligibility programs per caseworker is around 757 per worker. So that's, of course, high, and those workers are working around the clock, but that's what that reflected.
Well, I know at one time in the department, we had over 300 added caseworkers. So have we lost that many employees over the last several years?
Over the past few years, particularly since the advent of the recession and states having to make budget cuts, and Georgia included in that, the department has lost a number of employees, probably hundreds. I don't have the exact number, but many of them have been reflected in this area and in others as well. So yes, there has been a reduction in the number of employees, and there's been an inability to replace those employees because of fiscal constraints. And what I have said, and it's my opinion, but I think it's probably accurate, is that I do not believe the state will go back to pre-recession staffing levels, that we're going to have to, through the use of technology and other mechanisms, find a way to do more with less. And it's certainly reflected within the eligibility work that's out there, and it's also reflected in the child welfare services. But it's a fact of life that we're dealing with.
Are there any other questions? Yes, Representative Hard.
Since, Mr. Commissioner, what will be the cost of relocating those 2,000 employees to 2 Peachtree? And also, what about those employees that are in your career centers? Where are they going? How is that going to work?
Well, let me always answer these now with the caveat that these programs are not slated to come to Department of Human Services, and that they will be independent, under independent leadership. But in the original proposal, and I believe in the amended proposal, those employees are not moving to Peachtree Street. You've got the folks at Warm Springs. They're going to stay at Warm Springs. You've got the disability adjudication section. It's about 560 people at Stone Mountain. They will be staying there. There's a smaller cadre of people who work in the Labor Department headquarters here in Atlanta who would have been slated to move, and we had made accommodations and plans to house them on the 6th floor of 2 Peachtree. But in proportion of that 2,000, it was a very small number, I think probably less than 250 people. So the proposal or the concept was not that all these folks would be coming to 2 Peachtree. They're also, just as we have in DHS, they have 53 offices that may be more or less around the state, so those folks will be staying there. And what we said when the original proposal came out was that we didn't intend to cause any harm to any program or any disruption in services. So we understood, and we're beginning to understand and learn about the efficiencies of the call centers and the one-stop shops, and it was not our intention to change or alter that in any way. And I don't imagine that that's part of the proposal now.
What about the staff that are in the Department of Labor? Are they going to stay there? Will they be housed there?
Well, I can't speak for the Department of Labor itself, but for the Vocational Rehabilitation
those that are
those folks who were at the office here,
yes, sir,
that were a part of the administration of the program, the legislation then and now call for them to become part of either DHS or now the Vocational Rehabilitation Agency as an independent body. And so if those folks needed to move, we had made accommodations and plans for them to come to Peachtree on the 6th floor, and we thought there was sufficient and enough space to house them there. No one else would be moving from where they are across the state in different areas, including the Industries for the Blind, those facilities in Bainbridge and Griffin. So we had made plans and accommodations for that, and if as an attached agency or as the agency to which they are attached, we can provide that same kind of assistance, I'm sure we would.
Okay. Let's have one more question, and then this is it, I promise.
We do need to be brief because the commissioner has a previous appointment that he's
I do
sticking around
understand,
for.
Madam
I'm
Chair,
good.
but
Sorry.
these are
No
important
problem. I'm
questions.
good.
We're dealing with a lot of changes and important issues.
Absolutely, I'm fine.
My next question is really dealing with some of the surpluses that you had. And I asked the previous Labor Commissioner, that was something like $1.5 million in surpluses. And I'm just trying to find out, where did this surplus come from? How much did you actually have last year?
Surplus with regard to vocational rehab?
Possibly, yes.
I don't know the answer to that. We had established a transition team to look at the mechanics and the procedure about lifting the programs out, and I had not, to this date, gotten into any substantive area of their money or budget, so I do not know the answer
I
to
think
that.
there was some tobacco surplus money.
Right, and as I said, I'm sorry, I don't know any details about their budget at this point.
Okay. And now you do have some tobacco surplus money. You do have some, I think.
Yes, as I went through our budget, you'll see our tobacco money is reflected
Sure.
primarily in aging services, so in elder abuse and, well, let's see here, make sure. In elderly community living services, we have about $5 million in
Right.
tobacco funds. And then for elder support services, we have about $1.17 million.
Well, let's say, what did you have in surpluses in FY11? Did you have any?
Did we? I'll let our chief financial officer answer that. I'm
Yes,
not
sir.
sure of the exact amount.
Yes, we did have some surpluses in tobacco for this last fiscal year. This was, we normally don't. This last year, there was one about $800,000 in tobacco surpluses. Part of that from prior year contracts that were closed that had some money left over, but mostly was related to some billing challenges that we had between two different departments. But for most years, there's very little lapsing in that year budget.
Okay, could you have leveraged that with some federal match dollars?
No.
No, you couldn't have. Okay.
That
But
couldn't-
it's about 800,000.
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, not in vocational rehab. It could
I
be
understand.
used in, Department of Aging.
Yes, sir.
Right. But we've maxed out the federal dollars that are available in aging.
So it's roughly 800,000 in aging.
I'm sorry?
800,000 in aging. Did you say that?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Representative Henson?
You, Commissioner. I'm very concerned about the IT because I'm under the impression that Department of Human Resources and Department of Labor are under two different IT systems that don't necessarily communicate, talk to each other, or anything like that. And yet, a person going on unemployment would be going through labor. If people in any of these attached agencies can't pick it up because they're now attached to DHS, how is this going to work and what kind of money is it going to cost us with the IT programs, getting people to talk, having stuff at 2 Peachtree, being able to talk to Department of Labor elsewhere? How is that going to work?
Well, I think it will change a little bit with the alteration of the proposal. When the program and the services were going to be a part of Department of Human Services, we had established a transition team to look at all the different mechanisms that would be necessary to move the programs, have them shift to our administration by July 1, with the goal of making sure there was no disruption in services or disruption in the work of the staff. So we were beginning to talk to the Georgia Technology Authority and to work with the State Accounting Office on all those issues with regard to IT and financial as well. And our fallback position, were we not to be ready fully or find that we could not make a 100% shift by July 1, was to enter into a shared services arrangement with the Department of Labor so that there would be no disruption in services and we could continue to work on actual transfers as the year went along. Now that they're going to be an attached independent agency, I think that the IT challenges would much less, much fewer, and that they could remain on the systems that they're currently on. And if we needed to have some sort of shared services arrangement with labor, hopefully we could work that out. But I think we had a plan. We thought it could be achieved. And we continue to think that if they're an attached agency, that we'd be able to support them so that our ultimate goal of having no disruption in services could be realized.
Commissioner, I have another question, a little different, but it's talking about number 2 Peachtree. And again, you know, this has been, I've heard this on and off over the years, is the fact of Georgia State potentially buying the building. Or wanting the building, whichever the case might be, because they seem to be expanding all over downtown Atlanta. How much new money are we putting into renovation of 2 Peachtree, knowing that this possibility exists? And could you address if, in fact, there is any possibility of Georgia State acquiring the building?
Well, certainly I've heard that. I don't know what validity that has. The Georgia Building Authority manages the building. We pay rent to them as a state agency based on square footage and how many floors we have, just as the other agencies in the building do. If we were to move somewhere from 2 Peachtree, you wouldn't hear any complaints from me, but I don't have any information that would substantiate that as I stand here today.
Thank you. Commissioner, we're going to let you move on to the next meeting that you're supposed to be in, and thank you so much. But
all right. Thank you.
We'll continue now for just a little bit with the Department of Families and Children's Services, I believe.
If you would permit me, Madam Chair, I'd like to make one comment about the recent child deaths and what we discovered and what we're trying to do within the department. DFACS is a part of the Department of Human Services. It is a division within Human Services. It is the largest division and program, but it is a part of Human Services, and I, as Commissioner, am ultimately responsible for what they do and what happens there. So one of the things that I have tried to do as Commissioner in this past year, and will continue to try to do, is maintain an open and transparent approach to both the public, to the General Assembly, and to the media. So you have what information we have. So when we were asked the question, have there been and how many child deaths within a certain period, we looked and we provided what we found. And one death is too many, but whatever the situation may be, my philosophy has been that we do not try to put a Band-Aid on a problem, that we rip the Band-Aid off and we let the wound heal naturally, and what problems and issues we have to address, then we try to do that. Now, as we look at the numbers, and we were looking at from December 1 to February 1st, or February 12th, I think it was, of 2012, a total of 35 children who had died, who at some point in the past 5 years had contact with DFACS. Now, that could be as much as a phone call with an allegation of abuse or neglect 4 years ago, where a determination was made that there was no reason to bring that child into state custody, or something much more than that more recently. But that's the spectrum and the parameters within which the question was asked and was within which we provided information. So when you look at that total of 35, if you go back to the same time period for the past 2 years, that is not an elevated spike in the number of children, unfortunately. If you go back to that December 1, and I think we've provided you some of this information, December 1 of 2009 to February 12th of 2010, and then December 1 of 2010 to February 12th, 2011, it's about 30 and 27 and then 35. Also, if you break down what that 35 number includes, you'll see that 6 of the deaths are a result of co-sleeping, which is very sad to me because that is absolutely preventable. And so we're wanting to do more public awareness and more public campaigns to get people to help us to publicize the fact that this is a dangerous practice to partake in. One of those deaths was abduction by a non-family member. 11 of them were medical as a result of illnesses that the child had. 4 were unknown, no evidence of abuse. 1 was a car accident in which the mother did not properly secure the child in a car seat. 4 were a result of abuse. 2 were a result of sudden infant death syndrome. 1 was a result of a gunshot by another child. 2 were children who had been abused at home, went to the hospital. DFACS, because of the abuse, took custody of them in the hospital, and the children unfortunately subsequently died without leaving the hospital. So those were actually in custody, quote unquote. 2 were a result of bathtub incidents and accidents. 2 were a result of house fires, one which the mother was, I don't know the right term, abusing or doing something with methamphetamine that caused a fire in the house, and 1 was a homicide. So I don't intend or in any way mean to minimize the numbers or the tragic effects, but I think it's important to understand them and look at them in context of what actually occurred. And we have challenges with regard to the number of cases that our caseworkers have to deal with around the state. But I don't try to tell our folks that we'll be able to bring on 200 or 300 or 400 more staff, that we're going to try to have to learn to do better with what we have. One of the things I want to try to do is try to have a redistribution of staff from the eligibility side. If we can enhance technology and do things more efficiently on that end, and then have a greater distribution of toward child welfare, where a person, a body, a caseworker can actually have more of a substantial effect on what happens around the state. But we have to address the issue that you raised, Representative Oliver. We have agreed with the governor's office to establish a quarterly meeting between, which will include myself, our DFACS director, Ron Scroggie, Tanya Boger, the child advocate, and the governor's office, to look at ways in which we can proactively try to address and prevent some of these things. Some of them, unfortunately, may not be preventable. So we would want to be able to have a system in place where we could track the data in a more efficient fashion so that we could try to learn what happens, but to try to be a little more proactive with regard to some of these situations that exist, which resulted in this breakdown that you see here. So to answer your question, I think that a plausible place to headquarter some of that activity is within the Office of Child Advocate. And we will continue to work with them to do that. That may not be your thought, that's mine as I stand here. And so we're certainly open to further discussions about how we can do what we do better. So I can address any questions with regard to the comments I've just made, but I have to go over to Voc Rehab hearing across the street, and then I'll let our DFACS folk address more specifically the questions, but I know you want to comment on what I just said.
I'd be happy to have this conversation continue with Mr. Scroggie, because I know you need to go. We've kept you on.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank
and
you
I'm
so
happy
much.
to answer any questions that you have as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So this is Ron Scroggie, our acting DFACS director. Kathy Heron, our deputy director, is here also, and hopefully we can help answer your questions.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
May I follow up, Madam Chair?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Commissioner. That's very helpful. I am aware that there's federal money for maternal mortality in public health. I'm aware there is an activity with a small amount of state money in the Office of Child Advocate for child fatality review. I'm trying to really understand is what are our options for federal government helping us pay for a truly independent analysis of risk factors and preventable deaths.
I think
It leads me to think that public health has always been the preventable health entity. So I'd like you to comment on that if you could.
Well, I think, first off, you're absolutely right. We got to find a place that we can start looking at these child deaths. You know, as you well know, the child fatality laws that were put in place, we have some counties out there that have the child fatality boards that are doing really good work to try to analyze their trends and figure out what's going on. We have other counties that are just kind of meeting the word of the law by having a once-a-year meeting and just kind of saying they had a meeting. So I totally agree that we've got to, at a community level and at a state level, start looking at all these deaths and see what we can do. So we were actually talking to several of the other partners, and public health is somebody I think we should definitely be talking to about what can we do to regain some kind of focus on this. And I would be glad to sit with you and others and see where that might fit and where we might be able to fund it. Because I think, you know, this is a Georgia issue. It's not just a DFACS issue. It can't be a DFACS issue. And these deaths that have occurred, I think part of what has happened and why I'm standing here today is beginning January 1st of this year, we began doing a statewide staffing on every child that had any history with DFACS, and who may have had abuse or who may have had abuse at the reason for their death. And what I would just say to you is I think in the past, the department perhaps leadership was more concerned about open records requests rather than really getting to the heart and the soul why, unfortunately, these children suffered the way they did the last few seconds of their life. Our goal right now is that no child in Georgia should die in vain, that we should look at these deaths and we should make some decisions. Is it public service announcements about co-sleeping? Is it about prenatal health? Many of these children died of medical conditions that we talk about, these 35 that died, and many of those medical conditions because mom was not getting proper prenatal care, perhaps was using drugs during pregnancy. One of the children died with a half a brain, for example. So, I mean, I think there are lessons learned that we as Georgians need to pick out of these deaths. And when we as DFACS have a role to play in that, we've got to learn those lessons, improve our practice, get out to our field, what they can do better, how they can make decisions better, how they can ask the right questions, do the right investigations. But quite frankly, I think we all as adults in Georgia have a role in this, you know, whatever that might be. And all these agencies that play a part, whether it be public health or otherwise, we should be coming together and talking about why are children in Georgia dying. I've been only in DFACS for a year and a half. Before that, I was in the private sector for 31 years here in Georgia serving children. And I've worn this BlackBerry in my pocket now for that year and a half. I don't remember a day. I get every severe injury and child death report comes on my BlackBerry when a child dies in Georgia. I don't remember a day, Christmas, New Year's, a day gone by that I haven't got a report of a child death or a severe injury in Georgia. It just happens. And I think until we all decide what we're going to do to try to help, it's going to continue to keep happening. And as the numbers show that we provide you in the green folders, you know, we can give you lots of analysis of these deaths, but they've been happening for a long time. The reason for them have been broad and varied for a long time. Our custody, as the Commissioner mentioned, we had custody of four of these 35 children that died in this 90-day period, or 60-some-day period, 75-day period. But those 4 children, 3 of them were on their deathbed, not just the 2 that the Commissioner mentioned had been already beaten and were laying in their deathbed and we took custody of, but one of them had a terminal illness and was dying of that terminal illness, and the mother was found to be incompetent to take care of that child, so we took custody so that we could provide the best medical care that child could get in the last days of his life. So I think, you know, had to put some context in some of these reports that are coming out, because I think part of it is we're raising awareness in DFACS. We want to know why kids are dying in Georgia. We want to know what we can do better to serve those kids and those families. And we want to know particularly what we can do better to partner with our community partners to help prevent some of them in the future.
Disabilities or medical infirmities or medical vulnerabilities are very consistent nationally and in the state. And that's one of the reasons I've had a real interest in the nurse home visiting program. And I'm going to raise that issue again. I assume that if we're moving in a prevention mode, which is clearly what you want to do, what we all want to do, then identifying medically fragile children in high-risk homes is going to be central and key to preventable deaths. And the home visiting program surely is at least identifying those medically fragile, high-risk homes. Not all medically fragile children live in high-risk homes, but a lot do. So that has to be a part, in my view, of this new analysis, and I very much appreciate the the way to be open and collaborative with some other agencies on how this is going to proceed?
Well, just to that point, I would say, we have over 5,500 contracts in DFACS alone. And one of the things we've just recently done is created a contract unit and start to look at the deliverables of those contracts. We believe that we can, one, be somewhat fiscally more prudent with our spending, but more importantly, we can find if we can target how we are spending our money with some of those contracts. Because through the years, contracts have just kind of rolled on, and the services that are being provided are not necessarily what's needed today. So we are currently looking at all the deliverables of all our contracts, and as we go forward into the new fiscal year, we'll be more comfortable that those deliverables are what we need.
Great. Any other questions? I have something that, and I noticed on some of the reporting here at the bottom, something that I've heard a little bit about but don't know much. Shines, Georgia Shines. Can you tell me what that is?
Oh, gosh.
I'm sorry, I just don't know.
Well, I can tell you a little bit. I can't go into a lot of detail about some of the, we're currently doing an RFP for the maintenance of the Shine system right now, so I got to be somewhat careful about how I describe Shines because of that reason. But I can tell you that Shines is a system that was put in place in 2008, and it is basically it meets all the federal regulations and standards about reporting. But it is a very, very complex system. For example, there's over 4,700 pages in Shines, which means a case manager could actually access, if they wanted to, if they had access to 47 different cases, screens that they could enter data into. And one, I think the challenges is, and some of the reasons the data gets to be very difficult to pull out at this point in time is because, one, the case managers don't always, a lot of the work they're doing is in the middle of the night, on weekends. Many of them do not have laptops or tablets that are connected to the Shine system. So here they are writing on a tablet in the middle of the night, maybe some pertinent data that needs to get into Shines. It's on a Friday night. They don't get back to the office till Monday morning. When they get back in there, their phone messages are filled up. They got all kinds of things they got to do. So the information that sometimes gets entered into Shine is not always complete. It's not always necessarily adequate, and there's human error that occurs. So the Shines itself is a very robust, complete, complicated system. The ability for our case managers to access that on any given moment is very challenging throughout the state of Georgia.
Certainly.
Years ago, we had the tablet system.
We did.
Where the caseworker went out and did the tablet thing. Is that not compatible with Shines?
Well, I'm not aware of too many tablets out there, and secondly, I'm aware that the ones that we do have don't always have compatibility. I would say, I don't know how many technology people here today, but I'm thinking that it's way less than 50% of the caseworkers in the state have tablets to begin with, and many of those that have them don't have the connectivity because of the various places in South Georgia, North Georgia, whatnot, that they can access Shines. I've been here now very little bit of time, but I've talked to a lot of caseworkers, gone out to a lot of county offices, and I'm not aware of many of them. Almost always they bring up the issue that I just brought up about how difficult it is to enter into Shines because when they're out in the field, they don't have that ability. Some of them that do have it will stop by a local Starbucks or something like that, or McDonald's, if they got the tablet and they got the Wi-Fi, and they'll be able to do that. But many of our caseworkers, the vast majority of them, do not have those tablets.
Gee, that surprises me, because I thought that, especially in South Georgia, it was almost universal that the caseworkers all had tablets that would connect up to Shine.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Is there a better reporting system? I have concerns about that. I feel like when you leave a child where a caseworker has visited, that information is germane, and probably germane at that very moment. And if that caseworker cannot update it or doesn't have the appropriate equipment to do so, what do we do? I feel like we're failing our children in that way, and that there is sort of room for unintended consequences.
I definitely think there's room for improvement. I think that's an area, technology is an area that, as Commissioner talked about, we've got to figure out how we can do better. We have talked internally about what that possibilities are and what the price tags are. For example, just to give you some example of technology and pricing, costing, we're moving towards a whole new child welfare or child safety response system. You've heard about us moving from a differential response model to a diversion response model to a differential response model, which is a component of our new safety response model we're putting in this year. But one of the price tags on that, and one of the slowdowns of the full implementation, is about $350,000 it's going to cost us to upgrade the Shines system so that the assessments and everything else can be fully loaded in there so that we can actually implement the new safety response model that we want to implement with the differential response component. So there is a price almost everything, and IT certainly is a big price to that. It's an area that we are looking at every day. I can tell you IT, I probably spend as much of my time with food stamps and child welfare issues and IT, pretty much equally divided amongst those three things. It's a huge issue.
Could IT improvements also help in the food stamp arena?
Could you what now?
Could the IT improvements also?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I think.
Are we not serving you well to do? Well,
I think you know that there were one of the technology improvements in food stamps and eligibility system was the document imaging system. I was told document imaging was on the docket to be fully instituted in Georgia in August of 2011, and we just have gotten the pilot out off the ground in 5 counties this month because of how things just are slow to get going, and things as far as technology issues take their toll. So we know that we have historic record number of people that are applying for food stamps and eligibility services. We know that our eligibility staff has been reduced since 2006 by about 1,000 individuals. As the Commissioner mentioned, we got about each one of those workers are holding an average caseload size now about 750 cases. So we know that in order for what those individual citizens want is timeliness and accuracy of benefits. They don't really care about a lot of human touch. They want their benefits when they need them, and they want them to be accurate. So that requires high degree of sophistication and technology, and it requires us to be able to do that technology well every time. So we're working with the FNS, the federal folks, on that. We're actually going to South Carolina, a group of folks, to see what they're doing over there. We've gone to Florida to visit some states to see how we can move to more and more process orientation in OFI, so we can get away from having so much touch by people. But it's going to take an investment in technology to do that.
Well, I think if that investment serves our population well, and perhaps even particularly our children well, it's something we certainly need to take a serious look at.
I think we're seeing that connection between the eligibility, the children that are needing food stamps and all the eligibility services, and child welfare. When families are under stresses, they can't get their food on time, or they're out of employment. They do, it used to be you kind of had minor stresses. You might go home and kick the dog. Well, now the stresses our families are under, they're going home doing a lot more of that, unfortunately, to some of their children.
Any other questions? Yes, Representative Oliver.
The last time I asked this question, the Accenture maintenance contract for the child welfare Shine system was $4 million a year. Is that still roughly accurate?
Roughly.
And how long is that contract for?
Well, once again, we're letting out an RFP for that particular service that will start July 1 of this year. Is that correct? So
the $4 million a year does not include any programming upgrades?
It's maintenance maintenance. We're paying, I think we're paying, what, $36 million defects is to GETS for our technology support. So, it's...
Final question, is the Accenture $4 million contract only for child welfare, or is it for the eligibility programs as well as child welfare? Only child welfare, $4 million of IT maintenance a year. What are we getting for that? We're not getting new tablets. It doesn't have any capital application.
Well, it has some, but it doesn't have monitors.
It doesn't buy new computers. Does it do any new, what programming? Madam Chair, it just reminds me of all the questions about the $100 million that went into Shines.
Well, I think I need to be briefed on it a little bit better, and maybe y'all can come meet with me or someone who is an expert, particularly, and if any of the committee wants to be there, we'll certainly invite them too. But if this is the problem that it sounds like it is at mean, I hate to use the word dysfunctional, but it sounds like we're paying for something that doesn't work and isn't helping y'all do your job. So,
I say that it's very expensive, and what are we getting?
Okay.
And it's a very complex question. And I didn't say it didn't work. I said it's very expensive, and what are we getting? If you have to pay $325,000 for a programming upgrade, are you paying that to Accenture, or are you paying it to somebody else? And that's a very complex area, I know.
well, I'm well aware that some of our individual providers have developed some of their own programs to help with tracking. There are private providers also that are interested in some of this. So I do think we need some more conversation about it really soon, as soon as whatever expert can come. And I will tell you, I'm not an IT expert at all, so
We'd welcome
I need
that
a
conversation.
translator probably.
We'd welcome that conversation.
Yes.
We'll set something up to give you more information on that. But I will just give you a conceptual idea of what it costs for maintenance of software. When you buy commercial software like financial systems or any software from a commercial provider, there's generally a 20% maintenance fee every year that's paid for most software. So just to let you know, that's pretty universal for any kind of software, that it's very expensive to maintain software. And so just to give you a little bit of context.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the panel? If not, then we will be adjourned. Thank you so much. If I could keep the panelists here just a few minutes. Thank you all for being with us.